discussed about the iteration mechanism in the previous class. Okay, and in the current class we'll discuss how sorting will be done. Okay, how sorting will be done in case of list stream, and how sorting will be done in case of search stream, and how sorting will be done in other streams. Okay, now let's consider we have a list. Okay, iteration is over, so let me comment out this code. Iteration is over, so just I'll comment out this code. Okay, so now let me add some elements to the array list. These are the elements present in the array list. Now, if you want to sort any collection of the list stream, if you want to sort any collection of the list stream, then we should go for collections class. Already we have discussed about collections class in the morning class. Okay, collections is a utility class which is used to perform some utility actions on collections like searching, sorting, synchronization and all. Collections dot sort of. There is a method sort in the collections which can take a collection, which can take a list. How we can sort a list means using collections dot sort. And the sort method is overloaded in collections. In the collections class, the sort method is overloaded. There are two sort methods. One is collections.sort, which takes a list. Collections.sort, which takes a list and a comparator, which is then comparator. Okay, we'll discuss about the second sort method later on, but for some initial examples we'll concentrate upon the first sort method, which takes just a list. The sort method in collections class is overloaded. It may take either list or even it may take a list as well as a comparator. The second one that we'll discuss later on. At this point of time, we'll concentrate upon first sort method. Okay, this sort method of collections class will be used only to sort the elements of a list stream. Okay, we cannot use collections.sort for set or map. We can use this only for list. So let me use the collections.sort of list. Okay, and let me print list, and before sorting let me print list. This I am printing the list before sorting as well as after sorting. So here the list is being printed before sorting as well as after sorting. Okay, to perform sorting we use sort method of the collections class, and sort method is a static method. Okay, and to the sort method we just send a list that we want to sort, and automatically the elements in the list will be sorted. Okay, and there it is. All is this there. So, let me try to Okay. I compile, right? Go to the classes, execute application. So before sorting, the list was like this: 200, 100, 400, 50. Now after sorting, how it is the list? The list is in the ascending order. The list is there in the ascending order. The elements of the list are sorted in the ascending order. Okay? So we can sort the elements of a collection very easily just by going for collections.sort. And I think we have even not sure, just don't note it down. I'm not sure about this method. And now after sorting, I am reversing the order of elements. We can reverse the order using collections.reverse. We can reverse the order of elements in a list using collections.reverse. Okay, right now let's not concentrate upon reverse. Just reverse will reverse the order of elements. That's it. Okay. And next thing is, let's have some elements. Sorry, ನಾನು in class lo tarvata chestanu potana. Just we have multiple elements in the list. Let me have elements with different data types. So we have elements with different data types. 2 are integers and 2 are strings. Now what happens? It gives a class cast exception. Okay, it gives a class cast exception of type java.lang.string. Why it is giving a class cast exception means, okay, first it should compare 200 with 100, 100 with Srinath. Okay, while comparing 100 with Srinath, what it will do? It will try to convert Srinath to integer content. See how we can compare 200 to 100 means 100 should be converted into integer content and convert 200 with 100. At the same time, Ravi should be converted into integer content. But can we convert this object into integer? No. So while converting, it gives a class cast exception. So to avoid the class cast exceptions while sorting, in general, we should have a list which contains elements that are mutually comparable. Okay, if you want to sort the elements of a list, then the elements of a list should be mutually comparable. Then only we can sort the elements. If you want to sort a list, then the list should contain elements that are mutually comparable. A list can be sorted only if the list contains elements that are mutually comparable. So we cannot compare 100 with Ravi. Those two are different objects. So we should have elements that are mutually comparable to sort a list. Okay? So now let me have. Now will it give a class exception? Yes or no? Will it give a class exception? No, just because all our strings, even 200, 100, these are present in double quotes. So whatever the content that is present in double quotes, it will be a string. So it's sorted in ascending order, okay, of elements. So just it is sorted in ascending order, but we have reversed the direction. We have reversed the collection. Sorry, it's sorted in a ascending order. Okay, the list elements are sorted in the ascending order, and first the digits will be given the priority, and the like from lower to higher, first digits, then uppercase, then lowercase. Let me consider that. Which will come first, R or S? In general, as per alphabets, R should come first, right? So which one is coming first here? Yes, just because the lower case has a higher ASCII value when compared to the corresponding uppercase. Lower case will have higher ASCII value when compared to the corresponding uppercase. So as in the ascending, first numbers, then uppercase, then lowercase. That will be the precedence for strings. See, if the first character itself is changing, let's consider like we have Ramesh. So now what happens? The first two characters are the same. So it will compare V and M. Okay? And let me have a null value. Can we have a null value inside a list? It's possible to have a null value in case of a list. But if the list is supposed to be sorted, null value should not be there. It will give a null pointer exception. Just because it should compare null value with other elements. If you want to sort the elements, first we should compare the elements, right? First we need to compare 200 with 100, 200 with Ravi, 200 with Ramesh, 200 with null. So if you want to sort the elements, first we should compare the elements mutually. Then only we can sort the elements in either in ascending or in descending order. So the first step is sorting is comparison. We should compare 100 with 200, 200 with Ravi, Ravi with Ramesh, Ramesh with 100, Ramesh with 200. Like that, we should perform multiple steps of sorting, multiple steps of comparison. Okay, after multiple steps of comparison, then finally we achieve the result of sorting. Without comparing the elements, can we achieve sorting? No. It's impossible to sort elements in any programming language without comparison. Comparison is must for sorting. So, in order to compare, first it should have a valid object. But if there is a null, and if with null as a reference, if we try to compare another object, obviously it will be a null pointer exception. So, the elements that are present in a list should be mutually comparable if you want to sort a list. And that list should not contain null values. The list contains null values, and if we try to sort a list, it will give a null pointer exception. Okay? Understood? Now, got it right? Everybody? Definitely. Null dot something of null will give a null pointer exception. And the next thing, let me add some person objects. Now did we override equals and hash code method for person? Yes, we have already overridden the equals and hash code method. So we have, sorry, let me add person objects, it is a mistake. Now I am adding 4 person objects to the list and I am sorting the elements of the list. Now are the elements of the list mutually comparable or not? Are the elements of the list mutually comparable or not? Why not?
Different kinds of One is integer and the other is string.
See, what I am adding to the list? I am adding integer and list. I am adding integer to the list. Am I adding integer to the list? What am I adding to the list? This is what I am adding into the list, right? What this will do? What the highlighted portion will do? What the highlighted portion will do?
You create an object.
You create an object to which class? Person class. Now what I am adding to the list? Am I adding integer? No, I am adding person class object to the list. Rather than creating p1 equal to new person, just I am directly creating the object without reference. We will create a reference to the object only when it is required. Now in this case, it's not mandatory to create a reference. Directly I am creating the object and directly I am adding to that object to the list. Okay? Now the list contains 4 person objects. Now just tell, are those person objects mutually comparable or not? Yes or no? Yes? Everybody yes? That's what the goes. People who has gone for a couple of interviews, 25 to 30 interviews, and those who have listened to the previous classes are also telling us. The same for me even. As a trainer it is same, it's not same for you. As a trainer it is same for me. I know that the guys understand whom I am pointing. It's a waste of time for me and you. You can leave, if you want you can leave for the day, and if you want you can leave the university. Okay, this will give a class cast exception, telling that these are not mutually comparable. By default, an object or a class that is created by the user is not comparable. By default, a class is not comparable. Okay? Or by default, the object of a class is not comparable. By default, the object of a class is not comparable. Okay? By default, the object of a class is not comparable. Now let me show you the source code. Let me explain. And to make the class or to make the object of a class as comparable, to make an object of a class as comparable, okay, we need to implement that class with an interface named comparable. Comparable is the interface that exists in java.lang package. Comparable is the interface that exists in java.lang package. So if you want to compare the objects of a class while sorting, if you want to compare the objects of a class while sorting, if you want to sort objects of a class while sorting, then that class should be comparable. And how we can make a class is comparable means implementing the class with an interface comparable which exists in java.lang package. How we can make a class as comparable means by implementing with the interface java.lang.comparable. Okay, if you implement a class with comparable interface, then only that class objects can be compared while sorting. If the class doesn't implement with comparable, then while sorting that class objects will not be compared. So let's see the existing ones. Java.lang. Let me take a simple example, which is a string. This is the source code of string. Now, is this string comparable? Is the string class implementing comparable interface? Yes. A string and wrapper class. All string buffer. If I am telling string means it includes all the string related classes like string buffer, string builder. Okay, and like we have wrapper classes, and all the wrapper classes are by default comparable. Okay, all string classes and all wrapper classes are comparable by default. So that problem, the class exception did not occur for strings and wrapper classes. Okay, this class exception did not occur for strings and wrapper classes just because by default, okay, by default string and wrapper classes are comparable, or already string and wrapper classes are comparable. The string and wrapper classes are already comparable. Okay, so if you add strings or some primitives or wrapper classes to a collection, okay, this class exception will not arise just because they are already comparable. But person is a class which is created by us, so it's our responsibility to make it comparable. Okay, so let me implement with comparable. Now this comparable is not a markup interface. It has, okay, abstract method. What is the abstract method present in the comparable? Okay, there is an abstract method present in the comparable interface. Okay, that is compare to. Okay, compare to is abstract method present in the comparable. Okay, class person implements comparable. What is it telling? Class person implements comparable but does not override compare to method. Okay, so the comparable interface contains one abstract method, that is compare to. Okay, the syntax of compare to is public int compare to of object. This is the syntax or signature of comparative method in a comparable. This is the signature of comparative method in the comparable. Okay, so the comparative method will take an object and will return an integer value. Okay, so let me make the classes comparable. So since we have made the classes comparable, we should override the abstract method. Compare to, which is takes a object. Right? So now we need to typecast into person. And we need to check that the object that is inputted is of type person. Let's consider like if we are trying to typecast, let's consider like this, the object that is inputted is of type some employee. If we try to typecast employee object into person, what happens? It will give a class case exception just because employee is one object and person is another object. Let's consider that the inputted value is a string. Now if we typecast string into a person, what happens? It will give a class case exception. So to avoid this kind of class case exception, at the initial stage itself, we'll check if, okay, we'll write a condition that if the object obj is referring to person class object, if obj is referring to person class object. But how we can find whether obj is referring to a person class object or some other class object? Okay, there is an attribute or there is an identifier named instance of. There is an identifier named instance of. Instance of is a keyword. Okay, this instance of is used to verify whether the reference is pointing to the object of a specific class or not. The instance of will be used to verify whether a reference is pointing to the object of a specific class or not. Now I am verifying whether obj is referring to person class object or not. If the obj is referring to person class object, then only I should typecast into person. Okay? Understood? How we can see we have a reference, but we don't know what is the object that the reference is pointing to, but we can verify against to a class. Okay, we can verify the reference against to a class whether the reference is pointing to the object of that specific class or not by using instance of. Understood the usage of instance of? Everybody? Instance of is used to verify whether a reference variable is pointing to the object of a specific class or not. Okay, now it will give true. This highlighted portion will give true if obj is referring to person class object. Otherwise, it will give false. Okay. Now, why this comparative method is used? Okay, why? What is the advantage of this comparative method means? Okay, see, if it is an integer, then we can write a logic that this integer should be sorted in the ascending order, like first 100, then 200, then 300, like that. Okay, but how we can sort the person objects? On which criteria? Whether we need to sort the based on the IDs, or do we need to sort based on the names, or do we need to sort first IDs and then names, or do we need to sort first based on a name then ID? What is the criteria for sorting? That logic, the logic of sorting will be written in the comparative method. The logic of sorting will be written in the comparative method. See, for integers or strings, it will be by default. But for person objects, on which criteria I need to sort the elements? I don't know. So we need to write the logic. Okay, on which criteria we need to sort the elements. Okay, and that logic is written in the Compareto method. The comparative method contains the logic of sorting simply. Okay. Now we will have a current object, and the current object will be compared against two other objects. So we'll verify. Now I am sorting based on the names. Let's consider like I am sorting based on the IDs. Okay. Understood what is the logic that I have given? I am writing compared to, and if it is instance of person, then if obj is referring to an object of type person, then I will return the current ID minus the inputted ID value. Okay? Just write this code, write this comparative code. Okay? Write this comparative method. I will explain the logic, how it will work in case of sorting a list. Now, if it is not an instance of person, I am returning 0. So, what these integer values? What this integer value which is written from the comparative method? Okay, we will do in the sorting. Okay. See, we are returning integer value. We are writing the logic. We are writing the comparison logic. We are writing the comparison logic in the comparative method. Okay, and we are returning some integer value. But how this integer value, okay, how this integer value will determine the sorting? Okay, how this integer value will determine the sorting? That we'll discuss. Okay, now let's consider that we have 4 objects, right? One is, just let me have the 4 objects. What's the first object? 200 Ravi. This is the first object, right? And the second object is okay. Third object is fourth object is. These are the 4 objects. Right? So, how the sorting happens is, first it will take the first object. Okay? First it will take the first object. And by taking the first object as a current object, okay, it will compare, okay, the JVM will compare with the remaining objects. Okay, what is the first object? ID is 200 and name is Ravi. So, taking this object as a current object, the JVM will compare this current object. By taking this as a current object, the JVM will compare with the respective objects on the list. Let's consider like this is the current object. Okay, this will be compared with first, second, and third. Okay, this will be compared with first, second, and third. So let's consider that this is the current object. and the current object is compared against the second object. Now, if the current object is compared against the second object, now let's consider like what is the current object? 200 Srinath. What is the inputted object? 100. Sorry, 200 Ravi and 100 Srinath. So the current object is 200 Ravi. The inputted object is 100 and Srinath. So what is where to which object this is referring? Current object. What is the current object? The ID is 200. Okay, and P will be referring to an object which is the inputted object. What is the inputted object? 100. So this refers to 200, P refers to 100. Now what is the value? Will it return a positive value or negative value? Positive value. If the comparative method returns a positive value, then the elements will be shuffled. So the elements will be shuffled. The elements will be shuffled. Just because we are returning this dot id minus p dot id. What is this dot id? 200 minus p dot id 100. 200 minus 100 is positive value. If it returns a positive value, obviously the elements will be shuffled. What is the inputted object? Person. Now, is obj instance of person means it will verify. Okay, whether obj reference is referring to a person class object or not. Are we inputting a person class object? Yes. So obviously it will be true, right? That's what I told. Okay. Instance of is used to verify whether the reference variable is referring to a object of that particular class or not. Okay. Normal reference. See, ASCII value is different and reference is different. Okay. We cannot combine them. Why you got confused with both of them? ASCII value is an integer value that represents a character in a string. The reference variable is different. Okay? That's what we are writing the comparison logic, right? We have written the comparison logic that we are comparing or we are sorting only based on the IDs. If you want to sort based on the names, we write that comparison logic. Our comparison logic in this method is that we are comparing only based on the IDs. We may have a comparison logic that first based on ID, then based on the name. First based on name or based on the ID. Only based on the name. It's our wish that we can go for any comparison logic. Okay? Now it will shuffle the positions. Now in the first position, what is there? 100 and Srinath. Okay, now this will be compared, okay, with the remaining elements. What is the remaining elements? 200, 400 and 300. Now any of them will return a positive value. 100 minus 200 will return a positive. 200 minus 400 will return positive. 400 minus 300, sorry, 100 minus 300 will return a positive value. No. So now in the first iteration, the minimum value will be coming at the first position. Now it will come to the next position. What is the value in the next position? 200. So it will compare 200 with the remaining elements. Now if we compare 200 with 400, okay, the current object is 200 and the inputted object is 400. 200 minus 400, will it give a positive or negative value? Negative value. If it is a negative value, are the indexes shuffled? No. So compare 200 with 300. 200 minus 300, will it be a negative value or positive value? Negative value. The negative value is there, the indexes will not be shuffled. Now this is over. So this is fixed as the second position. Now come to the third position. 400, 300. 400 minus 300, will it give a positive value or negative value? Positive value. If it is a positive value, what happens? Indexes will be, the elements will be shuffled. So Now, are these elements sorted in ascending order of IDs? Are the person objects sorted in ascending order of the IDs? Yes or no? Yes. This is how the sorting will occur. This is how the sorting will happen, and the comparison will happen in case of list stream, and if you use collections dot sort. Understood? Okay? This is how the sorting happens. And what type of sort it is? I don't know. I don't know exactly about the definition or the theoretical definition what this type of sorting is. If you know, you can tell what is this type of sorting. I'm not sure. Is it a bubble sort or selection sort? I'm not sure. I think it is a bubble sort, as per my knowledge. Just because the lesser bubble is coming first or the larger bubble is coming first. So I think it is a bubble sort. I'm not sure about that. Okay? Just you can verify it. Okay? Once you go home. But I think as per my knowledge it is a bubble sort. But I'm not sure about that. Okay? Now, okay, this is how sorting occurs if you use collections dot sort, which takes a list. Okay. Now, what is the involvement of comparative method in sorting? What is the usage of, what is the advantage or what is the usage of comparative method in sorting? The comparative method contains the comparison logic and it will return an integer. If the integer value is a positive value, the positive value means if it is greater than 0. If the value returned is greater than 0, okay, then the elements will be shuffled. Otherwise, the elements will remain the same. Okay. Now, if you want to compare based on the names, okay, since it is a primitive values, we are going for minus and plus. Okay, if you want to compare based on the name is a string, right? In case of string, is Compareto method already implemented? Is string comparable already? Yes, string is already comparable. So just directly we go for name dot directly we execute compare to method of string. Already string is comparable. Already comparative method is overridden in string class. So we will use the existing comparative method that is overridden in the string class if you want to compare two strings. Okay. If you want to compare primitives, then we use this minus. But if you want to compare some objects that already exist, okay, so we use the comparative method of that specific object. Equals? See, equals will return a boolean, right? How you can return? But comparative expects integer value to be returned. Okay? So we should use the comparative method. Comparative has a specific meaning which is used to compare the elements while sorting. Equals has a specific meaning that equals should be used while eliminating the duplicates. Okay?
When two objects are almost identical, then if you return 0, that means the object is.
See, if there is 100 and again there is 100, how you will sort? Is it required to sort the elements?
But in this case, if you return 0, that means that the object is not of the same type.
Let's consider that. Let's consider that we have. Let me go for the previous one. Your doubt is object is of the same type, right? So if we add another object which is again 100, if the ID value is the same, what happens? What is the value that it is written here? 0. If 0 is returned, then what happens? Are the elements shuffled? No, the elements are not shuffled. If the elements are not shuffled, the positions will remain the same.
But in the case that it is alternate string. We have in the place of ID, by mistakenly I have 10 string. Then also it will return 0.
Then also it will return 0. To avoid exceptions, to avoid the runtime exceptions, at that particular point of time I am returning 0. To avoid the runtime exceptions, I am returning 0. But it is a very, very less realistic scenario that in the morning class itself I told that it's a very, very and very less realistic scenario that we have objects of multiple data types in the same collection. But even in the worst case, we should not raise an exception and we should not block the application. So we will return some default values. Okay? So now return this dot name dot compare to. That means I am using the string class Compareto method, okay, to compare with another string. Okay, I am comparing two strings here. To compare two strings, I am using the existing string class Compareto method. I told that already, and even I have shown that already. String class is comparable, string object is comparable. Okay. So we use the Compareto method of the string class. Now the elements will be sorted in the ascending order of their names. Okay, let me start them with caps, all are small. Rather than confusing, let me start with small letters. Okay. Now how the elements are sorted? First Rajesh, Ramu, Ravi, Srinath. So how the elements are sorted? Are they sorted in the ascending order of the IDs or ascending order of the names? Ascending order of the names. Just because we have given a sorting logic, but sort the elements based on the ascending order of the names. Okay? Like that it will be. Now if you want to sort in the descending order, just what we will do is, just we will give in the reverse manner. Just if you reverse that, then the elements or the values will be sorted in the reverse order. Okay? Like this, we can sort the elements either in the ascending order or even in the reverse order. Okay? That sorting logic we write in the Compareto method. Okay? Just I have used this if condition to avoid the runtime exceptions even in the worst case. But it's not idealistic or it's not realistic to have a collection which contains objects of multiple data types. To avoid that at the compilation time, we have generics that we'll discuss. After discussing generics, you will have a clear-cut idea how to use collections. Okay?
Comparative method return the result in the sort method. Comparative method return the result there.
See, here we are writing, right? Comparative method is returning. See, sort method, what it will do? Will pick up one element. First, let's consider like 100. Let's consider like 200 is there. Okay? It will pick up one element and it will compare that object with the remaining objects. So, if you want to compare the one object with remaining object, let's consider that. We have 4 objects, right? 100, 200 A, 300 C, 100 B, 50, which is X. These are the four elements that are present in the collection, in the list. And what happens is, if we go for collections dot sort of this list, then what it will do? Just if you try to sort this list. In the sort method of collections class, all the logic is there means it will pick up the first element. Okay? It is 200. And it is one object. Right? It will take this object as a current object and it will compare the remaining elements. So this object will be compared with this. How this object will be compared with this object? By using the comparative method. So this object dot compared to of this object. So 300. This object dot compared to of this object. So now let's consider I have written a logic that this dot ID minus P dot ID. So what is this dot ID? 200 minus 300. But it will return negative value. If negative value is there, then position will not be shoved. Now let's compare these two elements. But the current object is sorry. First, if we compare 200 to 300, this is not true. Now, we compare 200 to 100. Now, 200 minus 100 is 100. So, if it returns a positive value, then the objects will be shuffled. Now, here 100 B will come, and here 200 A will come. Okay? Again, it will compare 100 with 50. 100 minus 50 is a positive value. The positive value will be returned from the comparative method. Again, the shuffling happens. So, 50 X 100. So, in the first iteration, the least value will come to the first position. And next, in the next iteration, what happens? The second will be taken as the current object. So, if you compare 300 to 200, what happens? 300 is another 200. So, 300 plus 200 is the positive value. Positive value is there, this is shuffled. So, 200 A and 300 C. Again, 200 will be compared with the next element. 200 will be compared with the next element. 100. So, 200 will be a positive value. Again, 100 B 200 A. So, in the second iteration, what happened? The second minimum value will come in the second position. Then, you go to the next position, that will come back 300 to 200. So, it's a positive value. So, 200 A and 300. So, after the iterations, what happens? After all the iterations, the list is sorted in the ascending order. Okay? This is how the sorting will happen. And this is how entirely comparative method will be used. Comparative method will contain logical sorting, and if comparative method returns a positive value with reference to the current object, then the objects that are present in that specific position will be shuffled. Understood?
And if we take a string, anytime there is some different properties, and the mutability, immutability, and comparability, and why is important to the string in the Java? Reference property is the string to the immutability, when it's compared to the different class. Java string is the important to.
See, why string is important? Not even Java. In any programming language, string is important. Why, you know? Any browser, any browser will give you the information only in the form of string. Whatever the browser that you take, Mozilla or Internet or Explorer or X or Y or Z, any browser can transfer the information only in form of a string. So without string there is no existence of any object in Java. Understood? From any media, let's consider like you enter your username, your password, your name, your mobile number, the amount that you enter while transaction. All these values will be sent from the browser only as a string. Okay? Strings are very important and you cannot ignore. You cannot develop any programming language without strings. Okay? The content of the file. Content of the file can be even if whether it contains character content or special character content or something like we call integer content. Whatever the content it might be, it should be read character by character and block by block. And once it is coming as a string, then we will convert the string to other objects. But the input to any program will be in form of a string. Let's consider a command prompt. Even from command prompt, whatever we give, it will come as a string. This is the characteristic of any operating system. It's not a characteristic specific to Java. It's a characteristic of any operating system and any programming language, so that the data will be initiated through a string. Okay? And where we are writing the comparison logic? In the Compareto method. Where the Compareto method is there? In the comparable interface. And from the comparable interface, person gets the Compareto method, and the Compareto method is overridden. So now the Compareto method is there in the person class. Now when the comparison logic is changed, do we need to change the person class? When the comparison logic changes, do we need to change the person class or not? Do we need to change the person class means it's not the name of the person class. When the comparison logic is changing, are we change the code inside the person class or not? When the comparison logic is changing, are we changing the logic? Are we changing the code inside the person class? Where Compareto method is there? See, what my question is, when the comparison logic changes, are we changing anything in the person class? No? When you change the comparison logic, where you change that logic? Where the Compareto method is there? Person class. That means if you are changing the comparison logic, are you changing the information of the person class? Obviously, you are changing the code inside the person class. That means whenever a comparison logic of an object changes, the class is supposed to be changed. Am I right? Class is supposed to be changed means we are not changing the name of the class. We are changing the logic, or we are changing the code inside the class. That means whenever the comparison logic of a specific object is changed, the code inside the class will be changed. That's for sure. Am I right? Definitely. But it's not a realistic scenario to change the model or to change the Java bean objects very frequently, unless we add or remove the properties. Unless otherwise we add or remove the attributes, we should not change the model objects frequently. But are we changing the model object just because there is a change in the comparison logic? Are we changing the Java bean just because there is a change in the comparison logic? Yes or no? Yes. Here let's consider a person is a Java bean Okay, where we are changing the logic of the person. Now, when we change the logic of the person, are we changing the code inside the person class? Yes or no? Yes, but that is not a realistic scenario. We should not do that. Okay? When the comparison logic is changed, we should not change the person class information. Okay? So what we can do? Okay? We cannot avoid the comparison just because the person objects can be comparable only if it implements comparable. Then the only thing that we can do is we can separate the comparison logic from the base object. Base object should be different and the comparison logic should be at different place. Then if that is the case, let's consider like now how it is, the base object is there and in that base class only we are writing the comparison logic. So that the base logic or the base object, okay, or the JavaBeans class and the comparison logic are tightly coupled. So that whenever the comparison logic is changed, the base class is supposed to be changed, definitely. But it should not be the case. It should not be a realistic scenario. Okay? The comparison logic and the base class should be loosely coupled so that when the comparison logic changes, just we change the comparison logic. We will not touch the base object. Understand? How we can achieve that kind of decoupling of the comparison logic from the base object? Means we should go for comparator. Okay? We should go for comparator. Comparator, which is there in java.util package. Understood why comparator should be used? Understood what is the disadvantage of using comparable? All of you understood, right? The disadvantage of using comparable is the comparison logic and the base class will be tightly coupled so that whenever the comparison logic is changed, the base class is supposed to be changed, which is not a desirable approach. So we should decouple the comparison logic and the base class so that whenever the comparison logic is changed, the base class will be intact, will remain the same. How we can achieve that kind of decoupling, or how we can decouple the comparison logic from the base class means by making use of a comparator. Comparator is also an interface, but the comparator present in java.util package. Comparator exists in java.util package. Okay, so let me try to make use of comparator, and we should not implement the base object with the comparator. If we implement base object with the comparator, what happens? Again we are writing the comparison logic in the same class, which is not desirable. So we should write a separate logic, or we should write a separate class for comparison. Let me write a class person comparator, okay, which implements comparator. So now we don't implement with comparable, which is undesirable approach of comparison. So we won't go for. Now some of the interviewers or in some of the written tests, they will be asking this question. Now for this class, okay, this is the Compareto method. Now what happens? Four options they will give. Compile the mirror, Random exception, output, first output or second output? What it will give? Definitely it will be a compile time error, just because the comparative method present in the comparable interface is public int comparative. But are we overriding this method? Are we overriding this method? No. Since we are not overriding this method, there is a method which is inherited to person class from comparable, but it is not overridden. If a interface method is not implemented, what happens? Definitely it will be a compile time error. Okay? So this kind of questions will be asked in some interviews as well as written tests. Okay? You should be aware of them. Okay? Just if you know the overriding and inheritance concept, it's very easy answer. Okay? Understood, right? What I am asking? Now let me remove this. Okay, and let me write a person comparator which implements comparator. Okay, now the comparator is the interface, as I told, which is there in Java.util package, so we need to import that. So I have imported the comparator interface which is there in Java.util package, and the comparator interface has an implemented method. One-to-one. Okay. Now where we are? Yes. Now I have implemented person comparator with interface comparator. Okay, the comparator interface has one unimplemented method or one abstract method. Okay, that is compare. Okay, just this is the syntax of compare method. Okay, which takes two objects. Compare method will take two objects. Okay, so just this is the syntax of the compare method. Public int compare, which takes two objects. Okay, and we done it, and the shuffling will be the same, either we use comparator or comparable based on the integer value. If it is positive, elements are shuffled, otherwise elements are not shuffled. Okay, so now we need to implement the method compare. Don't confuse with comparator and comparable, compare to and compare. Comparator is interface in util package which has a method compare. Okay, comparable is an interface which exists in Java.lang package which has compare to. Comparable, compare to. Comparator, compare. Many of the guys, 80% of the guys, those who are coming for interviews will be confused with these methods. They will tell in reverse. Okay, they will tell like comparator has compare to, comparable has compare, which is a false thing. Okay, comparable will have compare to, comparator is present in Java.util package which has compare method. Compare to method will take one argument. Okay, and compare method will take two objects as argument. Okay. Now let's assume that only person object exists. Okay. So this I have typecasted into person. Okay. And I'll compare these two objects. The same kind of logic, a very similar kind of logic, but there in comparative method, one object is considered to be base object and it will be compared with the remaining objects. But in case of comparator, nothing is there like a base object. One object will be compared with another, one with another, like that. There is no concept of base object here. It will have input of two objects and one object will be compared with another. In case of comparable and comparative method, one object will be considered as base object and it will be compared with the remaining objects. One base object with the remaining all the objects. But here in case of comparator, two objects will be inputted and those two objects will be compared. Understood? So I'm returning p1.id minus p2.id. So this person object will be compared. Okay. Now if person comparator, I have developed a person comparator which has the comparison logic for person class objects. But how I can tell that this list should be compared based on the logic in person comparator? Means I told in the very first hours of the class that sort method is overloaded. One will take list, another will take a list as well as comparator. Now which we need to use if we go for comparator? First one or second one? Second one, definitely. So we'll go for the second one. That's it. So what we are telling, sort the elements of the list by making use of the comparison logic present in the person comparator. We are telling to the collections.sort method that sort this list based on the comparison logic that exists in the person comparator. In which method it will search for the comparison logic? It will search for the comparison logic in the compare method. So just we are telling to the random environment that sort this list based on the comparison logic that exists in the person comparator, and in which method it will search means it will search for the method compare. Understood? And that class should implement with comparator and it should implement compare method. Then only we can pass it as a second argument. Okay? We can pass it as a second argument for sort method only if it is implementing comparator and if compare method is overriding. Understood? So if you want to make a class as comparator, first we should implement with comparator. Okay? And that class should override or should implement the compare method from the comparator interface. And the compare method should contain the logic of sorting. Okay? And we should take this person comparator class, we should create an object and we should pass that object as a second argument. The first argument is the list that we need to sort. Second argument is the object. Second argument is the comparator object. And we have created a comparator class which is implementing with comparator and it is implementing the compare method. And that compare method contains the logic of sorting. Now, is the logic of sorting present in the person class? No. The logic of sorting is not there in the person class. The logic related to sorting is present in another class which is person comparator. Now, are we decoupling the logic of sorting from the base class? Yes. Now, if you want to change the logic of sorting, where will change? In the person or person comparator? Person comparator. So, we are decoupling the logic of sorting from the base object, which is always a desired approach. Okay? Now, So what happened? Are the elements sorted based on the IDs? This is the first and this is the second, before sorting and after sorting. After sorting, are the elements sorted or the person objects sorted in the list based on the IDs? Yes or no? Yes. The person objects are sorted based on the IDs. First 100, 200, 300, 400. Just because we have given the comparison logic that sort the elements based on the IDs. And how the comparison will be done in case of comparator means just two objects will be inputted. Okay? No base object will be there. Just select we have objects with 100, 200, 300. Just select 300, 200, 100, 50. Okay? Now two objects will be sent to the comparator and those will be sent. Again another combination. Again another combination. Again another combination. Again another combination. Like this, two objects will be sent as a combination to the compare method, and internally uses some specific algorithm, and finally it will be done the sorted selection. Okay? Actually, difference between the sorting mechanism of comparator and the sorting mechanism of sorting mechanism of comparable and comparator. Comparable will take one object as a base object and will compare with the remaining objects. But comparator will take two objects and it will compare those two objects and again a pair, again another pair, and again another pair. Like that the sorting mechanism. I don't know what is sorting mechanism. I think it is a sort. Right? I'm not sure. I think as per my knowledge it is a sort. Okay? Comparator will use, I think, I'm not sure, will use a quicksort mechanism. Quicksort algorithm. Okay? So, which one is better means, obviously the comparator is better, just because the comparison logic is decoupled. But, if you want to make use of comparator to sort the list, we should go for a sort method which takes a list as well as a comparator object. Okay? So, if we sort the elements using collections.sort, which is taking a list, now will it compile successful? If this is a class and if this is a class and if we are doing like this, now will it compile successful or not? No? Why it will not compile successful? Person class is not comparable. If person class is not comparable, will it give a compile time error? Will it give a compile time error? In the first example itself we told that if the elements are not mutually comparable at the runtime, it will give a class cast exception. It will not give a compile time error. If the elements of a collection or if the elements of a list are not mutually comparable, at runtime it will give a class cast exception, but the compiler will not show any compile time error. Okay? So this will give a class cast exception at the runtime. That's the first thing that we told today. If the elements of a list are not mutually comparable, and if you are trying to sort the elements using the sort method which takes a list, then it will give a class cast exception at the runtime. Okay? So either we can make that person object as comparable, or we can use a comparator. So if we use comparator, if we have, let's consider like now in this case, if person implements comparable as well as there is a comparator. If the person implements comparable as well as, let's consider like person implements comparable as well as person also implements comparator. Let's consider like person implements comparable as well as comparator. Now, whether the elements will be sorted based on the logic in Compareto method or compare method. Understood my question? See, person is there. Person is implementing both comparable as well as comparator. Now, if let's consider like in comparable, I have ascending order of IDs. Because of comparable, we have Compareto method. Because of comparator, we have compare method. In Compareto method, we have the logic that the elements should be sorted in the ascending IDs. Okay, because of comparator we have compare method, and in the compare method we are writing the logic that we should sort the elements based on the names. Now, if I sort that list, whether the elements are sorted based on the IDs or names, that is my question. And if I am the interviewer, what will you answer? What will be your answer? Understood my question, everybody? Then what will be your answer? It depends how the elements are sorted, means whether it uses comparable or comparator will depend upon the sort method that we execute. If we execute the sort method, just take the list, obviously it will go for comparable. If we give a sort method which takes the list as well as comparator, then we go for compare method. Understood? Which one will be used means it depends upon the sort method that we use. But the ideal way is going for a comparator and adding a separate class for comparator. Okay? Now the elements are sorted. And now, is there any other purpose for comparator class? Are we doing any action other than comparing? Are we doing any other action than comparing? Are we doing any other action than comparing? With person comparator, are we using or are we doing any specific action other than comparing? By using person comparator, are we doing any other action than comparing? No. In a person comparator, we have only the logic to compare. But if our purpose is only to write a logic to compare, we need not to write a separate class. Okay? How we can do is in general how it will be done is we will write a static method. We will write a static method and we make use of anonymous in that class. Then what is the method that is present in comparator? Compare. So just we copy the compare method. Now, if we want to get, just we go for, that's it. So, are we writing a separate class for comparison? Are we writing a separate class for comparison? It's not required to write a separate class. The ideal way is going for an anonymous inner class in this scenario. Okay, if person comparator is used for comparison as well as other purposes, then it is ideal to write a separate class. But just for comparison means we need not to write a separate class. We need not to write a separate class just to implement the interface. If our purpose is just to implement the interface, in that scenario, definitely we should go for anonymous inner class. If our purpose is just to implement an interface, then we definitely go for an anonymous inner class. Okay? Did we see this kind of scenario in any other cases that we have discussed up now? Did we see this kind of cases, okay, that we have used an anonymous inner class, okay, in the concept that we have discussed up now? Did we see any case that we have used anonymous inner class up to the concepts that we have discussed up to now? Where we have used anonymous in our class? Calendar. Are we explicitly writing a call for calendar? No, we are not writing any call for calendar, right? But my question is, have we gone through this approach anywhere in the topics that we have discussed? In threads, what we have done? We have written a child through object like this, right? Very simply, we can create a child thread object. So, in the same way, if our purpose is just to implement the interface, we will not write a separate class. We will go for a anonymous inner class. Okay? So, our purpose is just to implement the comparator interface. If our purpose is just to implement the comparator interface, then we need not to write a separate class. We write a separate static method, get person comparator, and we go for an anonymous inner class. Okay? This is the ideal way of using a comparator. Write a static method, go for anonymous inner class. Okay? Go for anonymous inner class and write the logic. Okay? Understood? If the purpose is just to implement interface, we won't write a separate class just to implement interface. If our purpose is just to implement interface, then we'll write a separate static method to return that type. Okay? Oh, to return the type means we don't have a return type. Sorry. To return the type, and just we write an anonymous inner class, and in that anonymous inner class we override the specific methods of the interface. That's it. We release the return type, just I have written the return type. Then while sorting, just we give the list and get person comparator. So, just get person comparator, what it is doing, just to give you the comparator object. Okay? So, sorry. If you compile the application, go to the classes, execute the application. It's the same. It's the same output. Okay, the elements are sorted based on the ascending order of the ID. Okay? Understood? This is, and a very important question for interviews: what is the difference between comparable and comparator? When we go for comparable and when we go for comparator, which one is better to use? Either going for comparable or comparator? Why I should go for comparator and why I should not go for comparable? Why I should go for comparable and why I should not go for comparator? These questions, twisted questions will be asked by interviewers. Then list out the differences between comparable and comparator. The first difference would be comparable is interface in line package, comparator is interface in util package. It's a very important interview question. Oh, what's the first difference is? Comparable is a interface in Java.lang package. Comparator is in Java.util package. Okay? And the second difference is the comparable interface has a method compare to, okay, which takes a object as an argument. Okay, and comparator interface has a method compare, which takes two objects as argument, and then compare, okay, or compare to. What we do is we write the logic of sorting. Okay, and when this comparator or when this comparable is used means, when we should use comparable means, okay, we should make the base class is comparable if that particular class objects are being sorted in a list. If the objects of a specific class are sorted in a list, okay, if the objects of a class are sorted in a list, using collections.sort method which takes a list. Okay, if the objects of the class are sorted in a list using collections.sort which takes a list. That means if the objects of the class are sorted in a list using the collections.sort which takes a list, then we should go for comparable. When we should go for comparator means when the objects of that class are sorted in a list using a separate or using a decoupled comparator, or using a separate or using a decoupled comparison logic. Using a separate or a decoupled comparison logic. We want to sort the elements of a list using a decoupled or a separate comparison logic. Then we go for comparative. And the mechanism of sorting is also different. What comparable will do? The comparable will take one object as a base object and will compare with the remaining objects. But a set of couple of objects will be compared in case of comparator. Two objects will be compared in case of comparator. The mechanism of sorting is also a difference. And which one is advantageous means? Obviously comparator. Understood? And this will complete the sorting of elements in the list string. Okay? Sorting of elements in the list string. In tomorrow's class we will discuss how we can sort the elements of a set string. Okay? Now, are the elements of a set string sorted by default? Are the elements of a set string sorted by default? Are the elements in the hash set sorted by default? Are the elements in hash set or linked hash set sorted by default? No. Hash set and linked hash set just will eliminate the duplicates, but will not sort the elements. Okay? Hash set or linked hash set will just eliminate the duplicates, but will not sort the elements. Okay? But how we can sort the elements, okay, that are present in a set, that we will discuss in the tomorrow's class. Okay? Tomorrow's class at the same time 6.